I woke up that Tuesday morning to find my work van missing from the street where I had parked it the night before. And my first thought was that someone had stolen the only thing keeping my plumbing business afloat. My name is Aaron Whitman, and I had been living in the Riverside Meadows townhome community in Boulder, Colorado, for about 8 months. The place was affordable enough for a single guy running his own small business, and the location was perfect for getting to client calls across the Denver metro area. I stood there in my driveway at 6 in the morning, wearing nothing but sweatpants and a t-shirt, staring at the empty spot where my white Ford Transit had been parked. The February cold bit through my clothes, but I barely noticed. That van had all my tools, all my equipment, thousands of dollars worth of supplies and parts. Without it, I could not work. Without work, I could not pay my mortgage or my bills. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and started to dial the police to report it stolen when I noticed something odd. There were no tire tracks in the snow leading away from where my van had been. The snow had fallen steadily until about 3 in the morning, according to the weather report I had checked before bed. If someone had driven my van away after the snow stopped, there would have been tracks. I walked closer to the spot, my bare feet now soaking in the cold snow, and saw something that made my stomach drop even further. There were drag marks and compressed snow patterns consistent with a tow truck. My van had been towed, not stolen. But why? I had not received any parking tickets. I paid my HOA fees on time every month. I had parked in the same spot on the street in front of my townhome for months without any issues. The street parking was clearly marked as resident parking, and I had the proper parking pass displayed on my dashboard. I ran back inside and grabbed my laptop, pulling up my email as I tried to warm my frozen feet. Nothing from the HOA. No notifications, no warnings, no emergency alerts. I checked my phone messages. Nothing. I looked through my physical mail from the past week that sat in a pile on my kitchen counter. Bills, advertisements, a credit card offer, but nothing from the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. The HOA office did not open until 9, so I had 3 hours to figure out what happened. I called the Boulder Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher was helpful and looked up my vehicle information. She confirmed that my van had been towed at approximately 4:30 that morning by Mountain Peak, towing at the request of the Riverside Meadows HOA. The van was currently in their impound lot on the east side of town. Why was it towed? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. The notes here say it was a snow emergency removal, the dispatcher replied. Apparently, the HOA declared a snow emergency and all vehicles needed to be moved from the streets for plowing. I was not notified about any snow emergency, I said. You would need to take that up with your HOA, sir. The towing company was acting on their authorization. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately called Mountain Peak Towing. A gruff voice answered on the third ring. Mountain Peak Towing, this is Doug. Hi, my van was towed from Riverside Meadows early this morning. I need to know how much it will cost to get it back. Let me look that up. What's the license plate? I gave him the information and heard typing on a keyboard. Okay, yeah, I see it here. White Ford Transit. That will be $300 for the tow, plus $50 per day storage, plus a $75 administrative fee. So $425 today, cash only. My jaw dropped. $425. I was not even notified about this snow emergency. Not my problem, buddy. Take it up with your HOA. We were authorized to remove all vehicles from the street. You want your van or not? I wanted to argue further, but I needed my van immediately. I had 3 jobs scheduled for that day. including an emergency water heater replacement that I absolutely could not miss. I will be there in an hour. We open at 7. Bring cash and your license and registration. I hung up and resisted the urge to throw my phone across the room. $425 I had not budgeted for, all because of a snow emergency I knew nothing about. I quickly got dressed, grabbed my wallet, and headed to the bank ATM to withdraw the cash. The whole time I was fuming. How could they tow my van without warning me? How could they declare a snow emergency without notifying residents? By 7:15, I was at the impound lot, cash in hand. Doug turned out to be a heavy-set man in his 50s with grease stains on his jacket. He barely looked at me as he processed the paperwork. "Sign here, here, and here," he said, pointing at various lines on the release form. "Can I get a detailed receipt?" I asked. "I want documentation of all these charges." "Sure thing." He printed out a receipt and handed it to me along with my keys. "Your van is in spot 42, around the back." I found my van intact with all my equipment still inside, which was at least one small relief. I drove straight to my first job of the day, already an hour behind schedule. The client was understanding when I explained what had happened, but I could tell she was annoyed by the delay. I rushed through the job, then hurried to the next one, and the next one, not finishing my day until nearly 8 that evening. When I finally got home, exhausted and still angry, I saw a piece of paper tucked into my front door. It was a notice from the Riverside Meadows HOA, printed on their official letterhead with the logo of a river winding through a meadow. The notice was dated that day, Tuesday, February 14th. "Notice of snow emergency parking restrictions," the header read in bold letters. The body of the notice explained that due to the significant snowfall, a snow emergency had been declared effective at midnight on February 14th, and all vehicles must be removed from the streets to allow for plowing. Any vehicles remaining on the street would be towed at the owner's expense. I read it 3 times, my anger building with each pass. This notice was dated today. My van had been towed at 4:30 this morning. They were telling me about the snow emergency after the fact. This was not notification. This was covering their tracks. The next morning, I was at the HOA office right when they opened at 9. The office was a small building near the community entrance, decorated with generic landscape photos and motivational posters about community pride. A young woman sat at the reception desk, typing on her computer. "I need to speak to someone about my van being towed yesterday," I said, keeping my voice level. "Let me get the property manager." "One moment." She picked up the phone and spoke quietly, then gestured to a row of chairs. "Mrs. Brennan will be with you shortly." I sat down, my leg bouncing with nervous energy. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, a woman emerged from the back office. She was probably in her late 40s, with blonde hair styled in a bob and wearing a navy pantsuit that looked expensive. She had the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes. "Hello, I am Linda Brennan, the property manager for Riverside Meadows. How can I help you?" "I am Aaron Whitman from Unit 87. My work van was towed yesterday morning during what you are calling a snow emergency. I was never notified about this emergency, and now I am out over $400. Linda's smile remained fixed in place. "Mr. Whitman, we sent out notifications about the snow emergency to all residents. I received nothing. No email, no text, no phone call, no notice on my door. Nothing. We sent out an email blast at 9 p.m. on Monday evening. Let me check our records." She walked over to the receptionist's computer and typed for a moment. "Yes, here it is. The email was sent to all residents at 9:07 p.m. on Monday, February 13th. "I never received any email," I insisted. "What email address do we have on file for you?" I told her my email address, and she nodded. "Yes, that is what we have. The email was sent to that address. Can you show me proof that it was delivered?" Her smile faltered slightly. "I am sure it was delivered. Perhaps it went to your spam folder." I checked. "There is nothing there. And even if you did send an email at 9 p.m., that gives people less than 3 hours to move their vehicles before the emergency supposedly starts at midnight. That is not reasonable notice." "It was a snow emergency, Mr. Whitman. We had to act quickly to ensure the streets could be plowed. The snow started falling at 7 p.m. and continued until 3 a.m. according to the weather reports. You could have sent notice when the snow started, giving people 5 hours. Instead, you claim you sent an email at 9 p.m., which I never received, giving people only 3 hours, and then you started towing at 4:30 a.m., which is 4.5 hours after the supposed start of the emergency. None of this makes sense." Linda's expression hardened. "Are you suggesting we did something improper?" "I am saying the timeline does not add up, and I was not properly notified. I want the HOA to reimburse me for the towing and storage fees." "I am afraid that is not possible. Residents are responsible for being aware of parking restrictions and snow emergency procedures. It is outlined in the CC and Articus that you agreed to when you purchased your property." I read the CC and Articus. They say that residents will be given reasonable notice of any parking restrictions or emergencies. An email that I never received, sent 3 hours before the emergency, is not reasonable notice. Linda crossed her arms. "The email was sent, Mr. Whitman. If you did not receive it, that is unfortunate, but it is not the HOA's responsibility. Perhaps you should check your email settings. I want to file a formal complaint and request reimbursement through the proper channels." She sighed as if I was being incredibly difficult. "Fine. Fill out this form." She handed me a complaint form from a stack on the receptionist's desk. "The board will review it at the next meeting." "When is the next meeting?" "March 15th. That is a month away. The board meets monthly, Mr. Whitman. If you want your complaint heard, that is when it will be addressed." I took the form, filled it out right there with shaking hands, and gave it back to her. "I expect a response. You will receive one after the board meeting. Have a good day, Mr. Whitman." I left the office feeling like I had just been dismissed by a school principal. Over the next few weeks, I started asking my neighbors if they had received any notification about the snow emergency. I knocked on doors in the evening after work, introducing myself and explaining what had happened. Out of the 20 neighbors I spoke to, only 6 had received the email notification. The rest, like me, had either not received it at all or had received it too late to move their vehicles. However, only 3 of us had actually been towed because most people parked in their garages or driveways. The other 2 who had been towed were a young couple in Unit 34 who parked their second car on the street, and an elderly man in Unit 12, who always parked his sedan on the street because his garage was full of storage. The couple, Jake and Melissa Thornton, had paid $375 to retrieve their Honda Civic. The elderly man, Robert Chen, had paid the same amount. Neither of them had received any advance notice either. "I am glad someone is fighting this," Jake said when I explained that I had filed a complaint. "We thought about it, but we did not want to make waves. We are new here." "This is not right," I said. "They cannot just tow our vehicles without proper notice and expect us to pay for it." "Let me know if there is anything we can do to help," Melissa added. When March 15th finally arrived, I made sure to be at the HOA board meeting. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse at 7 p.m. I arrived early and took a seat in the back row of folding chairs that had been set up. Slowly, other residents filtered in. By the time the meeting started, there were maybe 15 people in attendance out of the 120 units in the community. The board consisted of 5 members. Linda Brennan, the property manager, sat at a table at the front but was not a voting member. The board president was a man in his 60s named Donald Karsten. The other board members were 2 women and 1 other man, all appearing to be in their 40s or 50s. They went through the standard agenda items, approving minutes from the last meeting, discussing the budget, reviewing landscaping proposals. Finally, they reached the complaints section. Donald shuffled through some papers and pulled out my complaint form. "We have a complaint from Aaron Whitman regarding the snow emergency towing on February 14th. Mr. Whitman, are you here?" I stood up. "Yes, I am here. Please come forward and state your complaint for the record." I walked to the front, my heart pounding. Public speaking was not my forte, but I was too angry to be nervous. On February 14th, my work van was towed from the street in front of my home at approximately 4:30 in the morning. I was not notified about any snow emergency. The HOA claims an email was sent at 9 p.m. the night before, but I never received it. Many other residents I have spoken to also did not receive this email. Even if the email was sent 3 hours notice before an emergency is not reasonable. The CC and Articus require reasonable notice, and this was not reasonable. I am requesting that the HOA reimburse me for the $425 I had to pay to retrieve my van. Donald looked at Linda, who stood up to address the board. The HOA did send an email notification at 9:07 p.m. on February 13th. We have records showing the email was sent to all residents on file. If some residents did not receive it, that is an issue with their email providers, not with our notification system. The snow emergency was necessary to allow our contracted snow removal service to plow the streets safely. As for the notice period, the CC and Articus do not specify a minimum notice period for emergency situations. 3 hours is reasonable given the circumstances. 3 hours in the middle of the evening is not reasonable, I countered. Many people are getting ready for bed at 9 p.m. And the towing started at 4:30 in the morning, which is 4.5 hours after the supposed start of the emergency. So clearly there was time to provide more notice. One of the board members, a woman with short dark hair, spoke up. "Mr. Whitman, I understand your frustration, but emergency situations require quick action. The snowfall was significant, and we needed to get the plows through." "I understand that, but you could have sent the notice when the snow started falling at 7 p.m. You could have put physical notices on doors. You could have used a phone tree system or a text alert system. An email that many people did not receive is not adequate notice." Donald held up his hand. "Thank you for your input, Mr. Whitman. The board will discuss this and vote on your reimbursement request. Please have a seat." I returned to my seat, feeling like I had not said enough but not knowing what else to add. The board members huddled together, speaking in low voices. After a few minutes, Donald called for a vote. All in favor of reimbursing Mr. Whitman for his towing expenses. No hands went up. All opposed. All 5 hands went up. The request for reimbursement is denied. Next item on the agenda. I sat there stunned. They had not even really discussed it. They had just voted it down immediately. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and sharp. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the meeting. As I pushed through the doors of the clubhouse, I heard someone call my name. "Mr. Whitman, wait." I turned to see Robert Chen, the elderly man who had also been towed, hurrying after me. "That was not right," he said, slightly out of breath. They did not even consider your complaint seriously. No, they did not, I agreed. You should take legal action. I would support you. So would the Thorntons, I think. I do not know if it is worth it, I said, though even as I said it, I knew I was going to do something. This was not just about the money anymore. It was about the principle. It was about an HOA abusing its power and not being held accountable. It is worth it, Robert said firmly. I am on a fixed income. $375 is a lot of money for me, and it is not just about us. If they can do this once and get away with it, they will do it again. He was right. I nodded slowly. Okay, I will look into it. The next day, I started researching Colorado HOA laws. I learned that HOAs in Colorado are required to follow their own governing documents and must act reasonably. I pulled out my copy of the Riverside Meadows CC and Articus and read through the parking and notification sections carefully. The document stated that residents would be given reasonable advance notice of any parking restrictions or changes. They did not define what reasonable meant, which was probably intentional, but most legal interpretations I found online suggested that reasonable notice for non-emergency situations was at least 24 to 48 hours. For emergency situations, the notice should still be adequate to allow residents a fair opportunity to comply. I also discovered that Colorado law allows homeowners to take HOAs to small claims court for disputes under $7,500. Small claims court was designed to be accessible without a lawyer, though I could consult with one if needed. I decided to file a small claims lawsuit. I would sue for the $425 in towing fees, plus lost wages from the time I spent dealing with the situation, plus the filing fee and any other costs. I would also request that the judge order the HOA to implement a better notification system. Before filing, I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Patricia Gomez, and she had good reviews online. I met with her in her office in downtown Boulder on a rainy afternoon in late March. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out a legal pad. I walked her through the entire situation, from waking up to find my van gone to the board meeting where my complaint was dismissed. She took notes and asked clarifying questions. "You have documentation of everything?" she asked. "Yes. I have the towing receipt, the notice that was put on my door after the fact, screenshots of my email showing no notification was received, and statements from other residents who also did not receive notice." "Good. That is very good. Do you have a copy of the CC and Articus?" I handed her my copy, and she flipped to the relevant sections, reading carefully. "This is a solid case," she said finally. "The HOA failed to provide reasonable notice as required by their own governing documents. The fact that they posted a notice on your door after the towing shows they knew they needed to notify residents but failed to do so in advance. The email system clearly did not work, and they had a responsibility to ensure their notification reached residents. So you think I can win?" "I think you have a good chance. Small claims judges generally do not like it when organizations take advantage of individuals, especially over procedural failures. The HOA's argument will be that they sent the email and that is sufficient, but you have evidence that the email system failed and affected multiple residents. You also have evidence that they did not use alternative notification methods. What should I sue for?" "You can sue for your actual damages, which is the $425 in towing fees. You can also sue for lost wages if you can document them. Did you lose any income because of this?" I was late to my first job and had to rush through all my jobs that day. I probably lost about 2 hours of billable time, so around $150. Document that. You can also sue for the filing fee and your time spent dealing with this. In Colorado, small claims courts can award up to $7,500. Be reasonable but firm in your request. I would suggest suing for the towing fee, lost wages, the filing fee, and perhaps some additional amount for the hassle and your time spent resolving this. You might also want to include the cost of this consultation. What is your fee? For a consultation like this, $200. If you want me to help you prepare your small claims case, I can do that for a flat fee of $500. I cannot represent you in small claims court, but I can help you prepare your documents and practice your presentation. I thought about it. $700 total for legal help on a case where I was suing for around $600 in direct costs did not make financial sense. But Patricia saw my hesitation. Mr. Whitman, this is not just about the money. This is about holding the HOA accountable. If you win, they will have to think twice before pulling something like this again. And you might be able to get them to change their notification system, which benefits everyone in your community. She was right. I agreed to the $500 preparation package, and we scheduled another meeting for the following week. Over the next few weeks, Patricia helped me prepare my case. We organized all my documentation into clear exhibits. We drafted a timeline of events. We prepared a statement outlining my arguments. She coached me on how to present in front of a judge, how to stay calm and factual, and how to respond to questions. The judge will want to know if you checked your spam folder, if you opted out of HOA emails, if you had the correct email on file, Patricia explained. Be prepared to answer all of that clearly. You checked spam, you never opted out, and you confirmed the HOA had the correct email. Make that very clear. I also gathered statements from Jake and Melissa Thornton and from Robert Chen, all attesting that they also did not receive advance notice and were towed. I got statements from several other neighbors confirming they did not receive the email either, even though they were not towed because they parked in garages. In my lawsuit, I sued for the following: $425 in towing fees, $150 in lost wages, $182 in filing fees and service costs, $700 in legal consultation fees, and $2,500 for time and hassle dealing with the situation. The total came to $3,957. I filed the lawsuit in Boulder County Small Claims Court on April 5th. The HOA had to be formally served with the lawsuit, which I arranged through a professional process server. The server delivered the documents to Linda Brennan at the HOA office on April 10th. According to Colorado rules, the HOA had to file a response within a certain time frame, and a hearing would be scheduled. A few days after the HOA was served, I received a phone call from a lawyer named Martin Cross. He identified himself as the attorney representing Riverside Meadows HOA. Mr. Whitman, I am calling to see if we can resolve this matter without going to court, he said in a smooth, professional voice. I am listening, I said. My client is willing to reimburse you for the towing fee of $425 if you drop the lawsuit. That is not acceptable. I also had lost wages, filing fees, legal fees, and spent considerable time dealing with this situation because of your client's failure to properly notify residents. Mr. Whitman, let me be frank with you. Taking an HOA to court is difficult. HOAs have broad authority to manage their communities. The judge will likely defer to the HOA's judgment on what constitutes reasonable notice. You might win back your towing fee, but you will not get anything else. You will waste your time and energy on a court case that will not get you what you want. Take the $425 and move on." His condescending tone made my jaw clench. "Thanks for the offer, but no. I will see you in court." "That is your choice, Mr. Whitman, but I think you will regret it." I hung up and immediately called Patricia to tell her about the conversation. "They are nervous," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "If they were confident they would win, they would not be trying to settle. Stand firm. You have a good case." The court date was set for May 20th. As the date approached, I prepared as much as I could. I made copies of all my exhibits. I practiced my statement in front of the mirror. I even did a mock presentation for Patricia, who gave me feedback and suggestions. "You are coming across as too angry," she said after one practice run. "You have every right to be angry, but the judge needs to see you as reasonable and factual. Present the facts, show your evidence, and let the evidence speak for itself. Do not let emotion take over." I worked on controlling my tone and keeping my presentation clear and unemotional. It was harder than it sounded. The night before the court date, I barely slept. I kept running through my presentation in my head, worried I would forget something important or say something wrong. The hearing was scheduled for 1 p.m. at the Boulder County Justice Center. I arrived at 12:30, dressed in a button-down shirt and slacks, carrying a folder with all my documents. The small claims courtroom was smaller than I expected, with benches for people waiting and a judge's bench at the front. I checked in with the clerk and took a seat. At 12:45, Martin Cross arrived with Linda Brennan. He was a tall man in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Linda wore another pantsuit and her same fixed smile. They checked in with the clerk and sat on the opposite side of the room. Linda glanced at me once and then looked away. At 1 p.m. sharp, the judge entered. She was a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and glasses, wearing the traditional black robe. The clerk called the room to order. "Case number 26-2215, Aaron Whitman versus Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association," the clerk announced. "Mr. Whitman, you are the plaintiff, correct?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, standing up. "And Mr. Cross, you represent the defendant?" "Yes, Your Honor," Martin said smoothly. "This is a small claims case for alleged improper towing fees and related damages." "Mr. Whitman, please present your case." I stood up and walked to the front, placing my folder on the small table provided. My hands were shaking slightly, but I took a deep breath and began. "Your Honor, on the morning of February 14th of this year, I woke up to find my work van missing. It had been towed at 4:30 that morning by Mountain Peak, towing at the request of the Riverside Meadows HOA. I was told it was towed due to a snow emergency. However, I was never notified about this snow emergency. The HOA claims they sent an email at 9 p.m. the night before, but I never received it. Many of my neighbors also did not receive it. I have documentation here showing my email inbox and spam folder, confirming no email was received." I handed the judge copies of my email screenshots. "I also have statements from 3 other residents who were towed, and several others who also did not receive the email. The HOA did not use any other notification method. No phone calls, no text messages, no physical notices on doors before the towing. They did put a notice on my door the day after the towing, showing they knew how to provide physical notice, but chose not to do so in advance. I handed the judge the notice that had been put on my door, along with the statements from my neighbors. The Riverside Meadows CC and Articus require that residents receive reasonable advance notice of parking restrictions. 3 hours notice via an email that many residents did not receive is not reasonable. Even if the email had been received, 3 hours is not enough time, especially when the notice was sent at 9 p.m. when many people are preparing for bed. The snow started falling at 7 p.m., giving the HOA 2 hours to send notice before they claimed they did. They could have provided more notice, but chose not to. I handed the judge the relevant pages from the CC and Articus. Because I was not properly notified, my van was towed, and I had to pay $425 to retrieve it. I also lost wages because I was late to my first job of the day. I have incurred legal fees to prepare this case and filing fees to bring this lawsuit. I am asking the court to award me $3,957 in damages, which includes the towing fee, lost wages, legal fees, filing fees, and compensation for the significant time and stress this situation has caused. I am also requesting that the court order the HOA to implement a better notification system that includes multiple methods of contact to ensure residents actually receive emergency notices. Thank you. I sat down, my heart pounding. The judge reviewed the documents I had provided, taking her time to read through each one. "Mr. Cross, please present your defense," the judge said. Martin Cross stood up, looking completely at ease. "Your Honor, this case is quite simple. The Riverside Meadows HOA acted entirely within its authority and in accordance with its governing documents. On February 13th, a significant snowfall began. The HOA needed to ensure the streets could be plowed safely. At 9:07 p.m., the HOA sent an email notification to all residents, including Mr. Whitman, informing them of the snow emergency and the need to remove vehicles from the streets. We have server logs confirming this email was sent to Mr. Whitman's email address on file. He handed the judge a printout of what appeared to be server logs. If Mr. Whitman did not receive the email, that is unfortunate, but it is not the HOA's fault. Email delivery is not guaranteed, and residents have a responsibility to ensure their email is functioning properly. The HOA used the notification system that has been in place for years, and that residents agreed to when they purchased their properties. As for the timing, 3 hours is reasonable for an emergency situation. The word emergency implies urgency. The HOA could not wait 24 or 48 hours. They needed to act quickly. "What about the lack of alternative notification methods?" the judge asked. "No phone calls, no texts, no notices on doors. Your Honor, the HOA is a volunteer organization with limited resources. They use their standard email notification system, which is the system outlined in the governing documents. They are not required to use multiple notification methods. As for the physical notice that was placed on Mr. Whitman's door after the fact, that was a courtesy to inform residents who may not have seen the email about the snow emergency policy for future reference. The notice was dated the day of the towing after the towing had occurred," I interjected, unable to stop myself. "It was not a courtesy. It was an attempt to cover their tracks." The judge held up her hand. "Mr. Whitman, you will have an opportunity to respond. Mr. Cross, please continue." "Your Honor, the HOA acted in good faith and in accordance with its governing documents. Mr. Whitman's claim for damages is excessive. Even if the court finds that the notification was inadequate, which we dispute, the appropriate remedy would be to reimburse the towing fee only. The other damages he is claiming, including lost wages, legal fees, and compensation for his time, are not supported by law. HOAs have broad authority to manage their communities, and courts should not second-guess their decisions unless there is clear abuse of power. There was no abuse here. This was a standard snow emergency procedure. We ask the court to dismiss this case entirely or, at most, order reimbursement of the towing fee only." He sat down, looking confident. The judge made a few notes and then looked at me. "Mr. Whitman, do you have a response?" I stood up again. "Your Honor, the HOA is trying to hide behind technicalities. Yes, they sent an email, but they knew or should have known that email alone is not a reliable notification method for urgent matters. The fact that multiple residents did not receive the email proves this. They had the ability to use other notification methods, but chose not to. The notice they put on my door after the towing shows they could have put notices on doors before the towing but did not. They are claiming limited resources, but they managed to tow multiple vehicles at significant expense. They could have spent that time and money on better notification instead. As for my damages, they are all directly caused by the HOA's failure. I lost wages because I had to retrieve my van. I incurred legal fees because the HOA refused to resolve this reasonably. I spent hours of my time dealing with this situation. All of this could have been avoided if the HOA had simply provided proper notice." The judge nodded. "Thank you both. I am going to review the evidence and issue a ruling. Please be seated." We sat down, and the courtroom was silent except for the sound of the judge turning pages and making notes. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, she looked up. "I have reviewed the evidence and heard both arguments. Here is my ruling. The Riverside Meadows HOA has a duty under its own governing documents to provide reasonable advance notice of parking restrictions. The question is whether an email sent at 9 p.m., allegedly providing 3 hours notice before a midnight emergency, constitutes reasonable notice. In my view, it does not, for several reasons. First, the evidence shows that multiple residents did not receive the email, which calls into question the reliability of email as the sole notification method for urgent matters. Second, 3 hours is a very short notice period, especially when that notice is sent late in the evening when many people are not checking email. Third, and most significantly, the HOA had the ability to use additional notification methods, but chose not to. The notice placed on Mr. Whitman's door after the towing demonstrates that the HOA could have provided physical notices in advance, but failed to do so. This is particularly concerning because the HOA placed these after-the-fact notices on the same day as the towing, suggesting they knew they had not provided adequate advance notice. My heart was racing. The judge was ruling in my favor. The HOA's argument that it has limited resources is not persuasive. If an HOA has the resources to arrange for towing multiple vehicles, it has the resources to provide proper notification. The HOA could have easily sent volunteers or staff to place notices on doors, made phone calls, or used a text alert system. The failure to do so was unreasonable. I find that the HOA violated its duty to provide reasonable notice under its governing documents, and that Mr. Whitman is entitled to damages. As for the amount, I find that Mr. Whitman is entitled to the $425 in towing fees, the $150 in lost wages, which he has adequately documented, the $182 in filing and service fees, and the $700 in legal consultation fees. These are all direct and foreseeable consequences of the HOA's failure. As for the additional $2,500 for time and hassle, I am going to reduce that amount to $1,500. While I understand Mr. Whitman spent significant time dealing with this situation, $2,500 is on the high end. $1,500 is more appropriate given the circumstances. Therefore, I am awarding Mr. Whitman a total of $7,957. I could barely breathe. The judge had awarded me even more than I expected when accounting for the reduced hassle amount, plus some figure I must have miscalculated. Wait, I did the quick math in my head. 425 plus 150 plus 182 plus 700 plus 1500 equals 2,957. That was not 7,000. The judge continued speaking. I am also adding $5,000 in punitive damages. The evidence suggests that the HOA was aware its notification system had failed, but chose to proceed with towing anyway, and then attempted to cover its tracks by placing notices after the fact. This kind of conduct needs to be deterred. The total award is $7,957. Additionally, I am ordering the Riverside Meadows HOA to implement a multi-method notification system for any future emergency situations. At a minimum, this should include email, physical door notices, and either phone calls or text messages. The HOA shall provide proof of this new system to the court within 60 days. This ruling is final. Court is adjourned. She banged her gavel and I sat there in shock. I had won. Not only had I won, but the judge had awarded me nearly $8,000 and ordered the HOA to change its notification system. Martin Cross looked stunned. Linda Brennan's face had gone pale. They gathered their things quickly and left without saying a word to me. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like I was floating. I sat in my van in the parking lot and called Patricia. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. "I won. The judge awarded me $7,957. Patricia let out a whoop of celebration. "That is fantastic. I knew you had a good case, but that is even better than I hoped. Congratulations." The judge also ordered them to implement a better notification system. "Even better. You just made life better for everyone in your community. You should be proud." I was proud. For the first time in months, I felt like justice had been served. The HOA had 30 days to pay the judgment. When 30 days passed with no payment, I filed for a writ of execution, which would allow me to collect the judgment through wage garnishment or property liens if necessary. 2 days after I filed the writ, I received a check in the mail from the Riverside Meadows HOA for $7,957. There was no note, no apology, just the check. I deposited the check immediately, half expecting it to bounce, but it cleared within 2 business days. After paying Patricia her $500 fee and reimbursing myself for all my costs, I still had over $5,000 left over. It was more than enough to cover the original towing fee and compensate me for all the stress and time I had spent fighting this. About a week after I received the check, I got an email from the HOA. This email, ironically, I did receive. It was from a new property manager named Stephen Wallace, informing all residents that Linda Brennan was no longer with the company and that he would be taking over as interim property manager. The email also outlined a new emergency notification system that would use email, text messages, and physical door notices for any urgent community matters. Residents were asked to provide their cell phone numbers if they wanted to receive text alerts. I later learned from a neighbor on the HOA board that Linda Brennan had been fired after the court ruling. The board had been furious about the judgment and the bad publicity. Apparently, Linda had known the email notification system was unreliable because there had been complaints about it in the past, but she had not pushed to implement a better system because of the cost. The board felt she had exposed the HOA to legal liability through her negligence. I also learned that the HOA's insurance had covered most of the judgment, but the HOA still had to pay a deductible and had seen its insurance premiums increase. Several board members were facing pressure from other residents to resign. Donald Karsten, the board president who had dismissed my complaint so quickly, announced he would not run for re-election when his term ended in 6 months. Jake and Melissa Thornton called me to congratulate me on the court win. "We should have joined your lawsuit," Jake said. "We are glad someone held them accountable." Robert Chen stopped by my townhome with a bottle of wine. "You did a good thing," he said, "not just for yourself but for all of us." Word spread through the community quickly. People I had never met stopped me in the parking lot or at the mailboxes to thank me for fighting the HOA. Some people thought I was a troublemaker and avoided eye contact with me, but most residents were supportive. The HOA did implement the new notification system as ordered by the court. In June, there was a severe thunderstorm warning, and the HOA sent out notifications via email, text, and physical door hangers warning residents to secure loose outdoor items and move vehicles away from trees. The system worked much better, and residents actually received the notifications in time to take action. In August, there was a special HOA board election to fill several vacancies. Jake Thornton decided to run for a board position, wanting to make sure the HOA operated more transparently and fairly. He won easily. At the first board meeting he attended, he proposed creating a resident liaison committee to improve communication between the board and homeowners. The proposal passed unanimously. Slowly, the culture of the HOA began to change. The new property manager, Stephen Wallace, was much more communicative and responsive than Linda Brennan had been. The board started holding quarterly town hall meetings where residents could ask questions and raise concerns. The heavy-handed, dismissive attitude that had characterized the previous management was replaced with a more collaborative approach. As for me, I went back to focusing on my plumbing business. The $5,000 I had left over after paying my expenses went into a savings account as an emergency fund. I was glad I had fought the battle, but I was also glad it was over. Fighting an HOA is exhausting, even when you win. In September, I received a letter from the Boulder County Court stating that the Riverside Meadows HOA had complied with the court's order to implement a new notification system, and that the case was officially closed. That felt like a final punctuation mark on the whole ordeal. Looking back, I learned several important lessons from the experience. First, document everything. If I had not kept the towing receipt, taken screenshots of my email, and gathered statements from neighbors, I would not have had a case. Second, do not be afraid to stand up to organizations that abuse their power. It is intimidating to sue an HOA, but they are not above the law. Third, sometimes fighting for principle is worth more than the money involved. Yes, I won nearly $8,000, but the real victory was forcing the HOA to change its practices and making the community better for everyone. I also learned that HOAs are only as good as the people running them. Linda Brennan was a bad property manager who prioritized convenience and cost savings over residents' rights. The board members who rubber-stamped her decisions without asking tough questions were complicit in that failure. But when residents like Jake Thornton stepped up to serve on the board with genuine concern for the community, things improved. In October, I was cleaning out my files and came across the original notice that had been stuck to my door the day after my van was towed. I looked at it again, at the date stamp that showed it had been created after the towing had occurred, and I felt a surge of the old anger. But then I let it go. The fight was over. Justice had been served. The community was better for it. I never saw Linda Brennan again. I occasionally wondered what happened to her, whether she found another property management job or left the industry entirely. Part of me hoped she had learned something from the experience, but I doubted it. People like that rarely change. One evening in November, nearly 9 months after the whole ordeal began, I was sitting in my living room watching television when I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find Robert Chen standing there with a tin of homemade cookies. "My daughter helped me bake these," he said with a smile. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did. I know I already thanked you, but I do not think I really expressed how much it meant to me. You did not have to fight that battle. You could have just paid the money and moved on. But you fought, and you made things better for all of us." "That takes courage." I took the cookies, feeling touched. "Thank you, Robert. That means a lot." "I also wanted to tell you something," he continued. "I have lived in a lot of places in my life, and I have dealt with a lot of HOAs. Most of them are fine, but some of them get drunk on their little bit of power and forget they are supposed to serve the residents, not lord over them. You reminded this HOA that they work for us, not the other way around. That is important." We chatted for a few more minutes, and then he headed home. I closed the door and looked at the tin of cookies. It was a small gesture, but it represented something bigger. It represented a community that was healing and improving. It represented the idea that ordinary people can stand up to institutions and make a difference. I ate one of the cookies. It was delicious. As winter approached again, I watched the weather reports carefully whenever snow was in the forecast. In December, there was another significant snowfall overnight. At 7 p.m., as the snow began, I received a text message from the HOA. "Snow emergency declared. Please move all vehicles from streets by midnight to allow for plowing. Email and door notices are also being distributed. Thank you for your cooperation." I also received an email with the same message, and within an hour, someone from the HOA had placed a physical notice on my front door. I moved my van into my garage, smiled, and thought about how much had changed. The notification system worked. The HOA was actually communicating with residents. The streets were plowed overnight without any vehicles being towed because everyone had received adequate notice. That is what the whole fight had been about. Not the money, though the $8,000 was nice. Not revenge against Linda Brennan, though I would not have minded if she learned a lesson. It was about basic fairness and accountability. It was about an organization following its own rules and treating residents with respect. I never regretted filing that lawsuit. It was one of the hardest things I had done, standing up in front of a judge and arguing my case against a lawyer and an organization with more resources than I had. But it was also one of the most rewarding. I had proven that one person with a legitimate grievance and the determination to pursue it could hold a powerful institution accountable. In January, exactly 1 year after my van had been towed, Jake Thornton called me. "Hey, Aaron, the board wants to recognize you at the annual meeting for your role in improving the HOA's communication system. Would you be willing to attend?" I hesitated. I did not particularly want to be in the spotlight or dredge up the whole conflict again. But then I thought about Robert and his cookies, about all the neighbors who had thanked me, about the improved communication system that was benefiting everyone. "Sure," I said. "I will be there." The annual meeting was held on a Saturday afternoon in late January at the community clubhouse. The room was packed with residents, far more than had attended the meeting where my complaint had been dismissed. Jake, now a respected board member, stood at the front with the rest of the board. "Before we begin the regular business," Jake said, "I want to recognize someone who made a significant impact on this community over the past year. Aaron Whitman, can you come up here?" I walked to the front, feeling self-conscious as everyone watched. Last year, Aaron fought against our HOA's inadequate notification practices and won a court judgment that forced us to implement a better system. Jake continued. Because of his courage and determination, we now have a notification system that actually works and that respects residents' rights. On behalf of the board and the community, thank you, Aaron. Everyone applauded. It was not thunderous applause, but it was genuine and warm. I nodded in acknowledgement, said a brief thank you, and returned to my seat. It was not about the recognition, but it felt good to have the community acknowledge that the fight had been worthwhile. The annual meeting continued with budget discussions, elections, and other routine business. When it was over, several residents came up to shake my hand and thank me personally. One woman told me that she had been fighting with her HOA in another state over a similar issue, and that my case had inspired her to keep fighting. A young couple said they were looking to buy a home and would be much more careful about reviewing HOA rules and past disputes before making a purchase. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the entire experience from start to finish. It had been exhausting, frustrating, expensive, and time-consuming. There had been moments when I wanted to give up, when I thought it was not worth the effort. But I had persisted, and it had paid off not just for me but for everyone in the community. My phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia Gomez, the lawyer who had helped me prepare my case. "Heard you got recognized at the annual meeting. Congratulations. You earned it." I smiled and texted back a thank you. Patricia had been instrumental in helping me navigate the legal system and present a compelling case. Without her guidance, I might not have won. That night, I sat down at my computer and wrote up the entire story from beginning to end, documenting everything that had happened. I posted it on a website forum dedicated to HOA issues, hoping it might help others who were dealing with similar situations. Within days, the post had hundreds of comments from people sharing their own HOA horror stories and thanking me for sharing mine. Several people said they were going to use my case as a template for their own small claims lawsuits. One comment stuck with me. HOAs exist to serve the community, not to lord over it. When they forget that, residents have to remind them, "Thank you for being willing to stand up and fight." That summed it up perfectly. Over the following months, life returned to normal. I focused on growing my plumbing business, which was doing well. I continued to pay my HOA fees on time and followed all the community rules. I was not trying to be a troublemaker or a rebel. I just wanted fairness and accountability. The HOA continued to improve under Jake's influence and the new property manager's leadership. They started publishing detailed financial reports so residents could see exactly how their fees were being spent. They solicited feedback before making major decisions. They treated residents like valued members of the community rather than subjects to be controlled. In March, exactly 1 year after I had filed my small claims lawsuit, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Martin Cross, the lawyer who had represented the HOA in court. The letter was brief. "Dear Mr. Whitman, I wanted to reach out to you personally to acknowledge that you were right and we were wrong in the case last year. As an attorney, I have represented many HOAs, and I have seen both good management and bad management. The Riverside Meadows HOA's handling of the snow emergency notification was an example of bad management, and you were justified in holding them accountable. Your case has actually influenced several of my other HOA clients to review and improve their own notification systems. In a strange way, you have made my job easier because my clients are now more proactive about following proper procedures. I hope there are no hard feelings and I wish you the best. Sincerely, Martin Cross." I read the letter twice, surprised and oddly moved by it. It takes integrity for a lawyer to admit he was on the wrong side of a case. I wrote a brief response thanking him for the letter and agreeing that there were no hard feelings. It had never been personal. It had been about principle. As spring arrived and the snow melted, I found myself thinking less and less about the HOA battle. It had been an important chapter in my life, but it was just one chapter. I had other things to focus on: growing my business, maintaining my home, building relationships with my neighbors, living my life. One warm afternoon in April, I was working in my small front garden, planting some flowers when a car pulled up and a young couple got out. They walked up to the townhome 2 units down from mine that had recently gone up for sale. "Excuse me," the man called out. "Do you live here?" "Yes, I do," I replied, standing up and wiping the dirt from my hands. "We are thinking about buying that unit," the woman said, pointing to the one with the for sale sign. "Can you tell us what it is like living here? How is the HOA?" I smiled. "The HOA is actually pretty good now. They are communicative, transparent, and responsive to residents' concerns." It was not always that way, but it has improved a lot over the past year. "That is good to hear," the man said. "We have heard horror stories about HOAs." "There are definitely bad HOAs out there," I agreed, "but this one has shaped up. Just make sure you read all the governing documents carefully before you buy, and do not be afraid to ask questions or raise concerns if something does not seem right. HOAs work best when residents are engaged and hold them accountable." The couple thanked me for the information and went to meet their real estate agent. I went back to planting my flowers, feeling content. The community was in a better place than it had been a year ago. I had played a role in that, and it felt good. As I worked, I thought about all the little moments that had led to the court victory. Finding my van missing, the phone calls to the police and tow company, the confrontation with Linda Brennan, the research into HOA laws, the decision to file a lawsuit, the preparation with Patricia, the nerve-wracking court hearing, the judge's ruling. Each step had been necessary, and each step had required courage and determination. I finished planting the flowers and stood back to admire my work. They were small flowers, nothing fancy, but they added color and life to the space. Sometimes small actions can make a big difference. A lawsuit over a towed van might seem small in the grand scheme of things, but it had changed an entire community's approach to governance and communication. That evening, I sat on my small patio with a beer, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the HOA, sent to all residents, announcing that the community had won an award from the Colorado HOA Association for excellence in community communication and resident engagement. The email thanked residents for their involvement and feedback over the past year. I laughed out loud. A year ago, the HOA had been towing residents' vehicles without proper notice and dismissing complaints. Now they were winning awards for communication. The transformation was remarkable. I raised my beer in a silent toast to second chances, to accountability, to communities that could learn and grow, and to ordinary people who refused to be pushed around. Then I took a long drink and watched the sun dip below the horizon, feeling at peace. The story could have ended there, with everything neatly resolved and everyone living happily ever after. But life is not always that simple. In May, I received a notice that the HOA was raising fees by 15% to cover increased insurance costs and legal expenses from the previous year. While the notice did not explicitly say it, I knew that my lawsuit had contributed to those increased costs. Some residents were angry about the fee increase and blamed me for it. One evening, I found a note tucked into my door. It was anonymous and brief. Thanks for costing us all more money with your lawsuit. Hope you are happy. The note bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I had fought for principle, but there were consequences, and not everyone saw it as a positive thing. I thought about responding somehow, maybe writing a letter to the community explaining my position, but I decided against it. You cannot please everyone, and I knew I had done the right thing. The increased fees were not really because of my lawsuit. They were because the HOA had failed to follow proper procedures in the first place. If they had simply notified residents properly about the snow emergency, none of this would have happened. Jake Thornton called me when he heard about the note. "Do not let them get to you," he said. "Most people understand that you did the right thing. There will always be a few who do not get it." "I know," I said. "It just sucks to be blamed for something that was not my fault." The fee increase is not your fault. It is the result of years of poor management and inadequate insurance coverage. You just happened to be the one who exposed it. If anything, residents should be thanking you for revealing the problems so they could be fixed. His words helped, but the note still stung. I reminded myself that I had not filed the lawsuit for popularity or recognition. I had filed it because it was the right thing to do. That had to be enough. In June, the community held its annual summer barbecue. I debated whether to attend, worried about potential confrontation or awkwardness, but I decided to go. I was not going to hide or feel ashamed for standing up for myself. The barbecue was held at the community pool area, with grills set up and picnic tables arranged in the shade. I arrived with a bag of chips and a six-pack of soda to contribute. As I walked in, I felt some eyes on me, but most people were friendly and welcoming. Robert Chen waved me over to sit with him and a few other neighbors. We ate burgers and talked about everything except the HOA lawsuit. It felt normal and good. Toward the end of the event, a woman I did not recognize approached me. She was probably in her 30s with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Are you Aaron Whitman?" she asked. "Yes," I said cautiously, bracing for criticism. "I just moved here last month." "I wanted to thank you. I almost bought a place in a different community, but then I researched the HOAs and found your story online. It convinced me to look closely at how HOAs operate. This community's transparency and communication were big reasons I chose to buy here. So thank you for making that happen." I was taken aback. "You are welcome. I am glad it helped." She smiled and walked away, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For every person who blamed me for the fee increase, there was someone else who appreciated what I had done. I needed to focus on that. As summer progressed, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. My business continued to grow, and I hired an assistant to help with scheduling and administrative tasks. The community continued to improve, with more residents getting involved in HOA committees and volunteer projects. The increased fees were grumbled about but accepted as necessary. In August, I was invited to speak at a Colorado HOA law seminar hosted by a local law school. Patricia Gomez had recommended me when the organizers were looking for homeowners to share their experiences. I was nervous about public speaking, but I agreed to do it. The seminar was held on a Saturday morning at the University of Colorado Boulder Law School. There were about 50 people in attendance, including lawyers, property managers, and homeowners. I was part of a panel discussion on homeowner rights and HOA accountability. When it was my turn to speak, I told the story of the snow emergency towing, the court case, and the aftermath. I emphasized the importance of documentation, the value of knowing your rights, and the need for homeowners to hold HOAs accountable when they overreach. During the question and answer session, someone asked, "Do you regret filing the lawsuit, given the consequences like increased fees and some residents blaming you?" I thought about it for a moment. No, I do not regret it. The increased fees were not caused by my lawsuit. They were caused by years of inadequate insurance coverage and poor management practices that my lawsuit exposed. If anything, the lawsuit did the community a favor by forcing those issues to be addressed. As for some residents blaming me, that is unfortunate, but I cannot control how others perceive my actions. I know I did the right thing, and that has to be enough. The audience applauded, and several people came up to me afterward to ask follow-up questions or share their own HOA stories. It felt validating to know that my experience resonated with others and might help them navigate their own challenges. In September, more than a year and a half after the original towing incident, I received a call from a journalist at the Denver Post. She was writing an article about HOA disputes in Colorado and wanted to interview me about my case. "Your case has become pretty well known in HOA law circles," she explained. "It is cited as an example of how homeowners can successfully challenge HOA overreach. I would love to include your story in the article." I agreed to the interview, and we talked for about an hour. The article was published a week later with the headline "Standing Up to the HOA, Colorado Homeowners Fight Back Against Overreach." My story was featured prominently, along with several other cases from around the state. The article generated a lot of attention. I received emails and messages from people across Colorado and even from other states, thanking me for sharing my story and asking for advice on their own HOA disputes. I tried to respond to as many as I could, offering encouragement and pointing people toward resources like Patricia Gomez and the HOA Law Seminar. By the time the one-year anniversary of the court ruling arrived in late May, I felt like I had come full circle. What had started as a frustrating and expensive ordeal had turned into something meaningful. I had not just won a court case. I had helped improve my community, inspired other homeowners to stand up for their rights, and contributed to a broader conversation about HOA accountability. On the actual anniversary date, I took myself out to dinner at a nice restaurant in Boulder. I ordered a steak and a good bottle of wine and silently toasted to justice, perseverance, and the power of ordinary people to make a difference. As I drove home that night, I passed by the Riverside Meadows entrance and saw the community sign lit up against the dark sky. It looked peaceful and welcoming. I thought about how much had changed since that cold February morning when I woke up to find my van missing. The community was better. The HOA was more accountable. Residents were more engaged. And I had learned that standing up for what is right, even when it is hard, even when it is risky, even when there are costs, is always worth it. I pulled into my driveway, parked my van in the same spot where it had been towed all those months ago, and walked into my home. The whole ordeal was finally, truly behind me. But the lessons I had learned would stay with me forever. Never back down from injustice. Document everything. Know your rights. And never underestimate the power of one person with determination and principle to change things for the better. That is the story of how an HOA towed my van during a snow emergency I was not notified about, and how I won $8,000 in court. But more than that, it is the story of how I learned to stand up for myself and my community, and how one small victory can ripple outward to create real, lasting change.